The pain in my stomach was unbearable. I tried to keep calm, but the weight of my body and the pressure on my belly made it hard to breathe. I gasped for air, and suddenly, I felt a sharp kick. It wasn't the baby, it was him. My husband's foot struck me with an alarming force, sending shockwaves of pain through my body. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. The man I had married, the father of my unborn child, had just kicked my pregnant belly. Panic surged through me as I struggled to understand why. Hello, my name is Madeline, and I'm 30 years old. I moved from the countryside to Denver for college and eventually found a job. I married Jake 2 years ago, and now we're expecting our first child. I met Jake at work, where he was the son of the president of one of our client companies. Jake has an older brother, Ryan, who works as a senior executive in the company and is known for his success. Rumors have been swirling that Ryan might become the next president. Though Jake isn't the heir, he has been working at the company as a senior executive, and he plans to stay in the role for a long time. At first, I wondered why someone like Jake would take an interest in me. But his persistent attention won me over, and eventually we started dating. He was kind and charming, and his family's company was stable with a long history. I found myself more and more attracted to Jake and decided to marry him. When we got married, I quit my job, influenced by a comment from my mother-in-law, Caroline. It's only natural for a woman to focus on her family after getting married, she had said. And at least until the child is 3 years old, the mother should be the one raising them. I didn't resist quitting my job because I had always been open to the idea of staying home to raise our family. When I announced my pregnancy, Caroline was thrilled, but she immediately commented on how my sister-in-law, Lindsay, hadn't quit her job even after having children. It's disgraceful to send kids to preschool while their mother works. It makes our family look bad, Caroline would say whenever we visited her. Jake, too, would echo his mother's complaints, often agreeing with her when she badmouthed Lindsay. It felt strange and uncomfortable to hear them speak so negatively about Lindsay, but I stayed quiet, not wanting to cause tension. Unfortunately, my silence made them think I shared their opinions, and their gossip only escalated. Time passed, and despite how harshly Jake sometimes treated me, I began to think that I was at least better off than Lindsay. That thought helped me cope with the increasing demands and criticisms from both Jake and Caroline. As time went on, my pregnancy progressed, and I reached 9 months. At a recent checkup, everything seemed on track, and we found out we were having a baby girl. I was excited and told Jake right away, but he didn't seem too interested. Maybe men have a harder time connecting with the baby until they're born, I thought, trying to brush it off. We welcomed the new year, and as was tradition, we visited Jake's family home for a large family gathering. Even Jake's brother, Ryan, and his wife, Lindsay, who usually didn't visit often, came with their kids. "Happy New Year, Madeline. How are you feeling?" Lindsay asked when we arrived. Before I could answer, Jake jumped in, his tone dismissive. "She's fine. Don't worry about it." He forced a smile at Lindsay before walking away without properly greeting her. Caroline quickly pulled me aside as soon as I walked into the house. "Madeline, I've been waiting for you. It's been so lonely without anyone to talk to," she said, her tone cheerful but her words tinged with criticism. Lindsay was right there, but it was as if Caroline didn't even acknowledge her presence. I gave a polite smile and nodded, trying to keep the peace. As the evening went on, the family gathered for dinner. Caroline, Lindsay, and I were in the kitchen, preparing food for everyone. There were about 15 relatives, including Jake's father, Richard, and his siblings, all gathered in the living room, where Jake was loudly toasting and boasting about work. I could hear him over everyone else, talking about how things were going smoothly at work, and how Madeline listens to me and Mom, so life's great with a good wife. It wasn't a compliment. I could tell it was a dig at Ryan and Lindsay. I kept quiet, but my stomach was starting to hurt from all the running around. Lindsay was the first to notice. "Madeline, you've been rubbing your belly a lot. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Before I could respond, Caroline chimed in sharply, "Oh, you should rest if you're in pain. We wouldn't want anything to happen." Taking her advice, I sat down in a chair in the room next to the living room, rubbing my belly and trying to relax. I could hear Ryan feeding his and Lindsay's son Ethan as he chatted with me from across the room. "Are you feeling okay, Madeline?" he asked. "Your health is important, especially now." "Thank you," I replied. We talked for a few minutes about parenting and what to expect after the baby was born. Ryan's stories about Ethan were both insightful and heartwarming. It was clear he was a dedicated father. "Do you know the gender of your baby?" he asked. "Yes, it's a girl," I said, smiling. "That'll be wonderful," Ryan responded warmly. But then I noticed Jake's expression darken from across the room. He stood up abruptly, his face twisted with frustration. I thought he might be heading to the bathroom, but instead, he walked straight over to me. His eyes were cold. "Why are you sitting down?" he snapped, glaring at me. "What?" I asked, confused. Without warning, Jake kicked my stomach. It wasn't a hard kick, but it was enough to make me gasp and double over in pain. I instinctively clutched my belly, the shock of his actions leaving me speechless. My heart pounded in fear, not just for me, but for my baby. "What are you doing, Jake?" Ryan's voice cut through the room, filled with anger and disbelief. Jake shrugged, unfazed. "It's common sense for a wife to stand. Why is she sitting here chatting while Mom is working?" Ryan stepped forward, his tone serious. "That's too much. You need to stop this." But Jake, with an arrogant smirk, dismissed his brother's concern. "What's the big deal? It's just a girl in there. Eventually, she'll get married and leave. It's not like she'll be any use to the company." A relative's voice called out from across the room, "Hey, that's going too far, Jake." Jake laughed, completely ignoring the growing tension in the room. "I've decided not to be like those husbands who spoil their wives. If my wife's being negligent, it's my job to correct her," he said smugly. I sat there, still clutching my belly, too stunned to respond. How could the man I married say such things? As Jake walked away, still laughing, I couldn't believe what had just happened. The pain in my stomach wasn't just physical. It was the hurt and betrayal of knowing that he cared more about his mother's approval than about me or our unborn child. But then something unexpected happened. Richard, Jake's father, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold, suddenly stood up. Without a word, he crossed the room, his expression dark. Everyone fell silent as they watched him approach Jake. "What the—" Jake started, but before he could finish, Richard kicked him hard in the leg, causing Jake to stagger. The entire room gasped in shock. "You don't have a child inside you, so I'm sure you'll be just fine," Richard said coldly. "And if a child does something wrong, it's up to the father to correct him." He grabbed Jake by the collar, pulling him closer. "Dad, calm down," Ryan said, stepping in to stop his father from doing more damage. "It's not worth it." But Richard's voice was stern as he looked at his youngest son. "Aren't you upset, Ryan? He's been talking down to you all this time." Ryan just shook his head, letting out a small laugh. "No, I'm not upset. I actually feel sorry for him." "What?" Jake spat, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Ryan sighed. "It's true. You've been so obsessed with the idea of becoming president that you've completely forgotten what really matters, family. You can have the title if it means that much to you. I'm happy with my life as it is." Jake turned even redder, the humiliation of Ryan's words clear on his face. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. He looked around the room, seeing the disapproving stares from the other family members. It was as if the reality of the situation had finally hit him. "That's enough," Lindsay said, stepping in to break the tense atmosphere. She looked at Richard. "Thank you for standing up for Ryan." Then she turned to Jake. Jake, you need to apologize. To everyone? Richard gave a sharp nod, his gaze still fixed on his son. That's right. You owe everyone in this room an apology, especially Madeline. Jake, visibly shaken, looked down at the floor. Slowly, he walked over to me. I instinctively covered my belly, afraid he might lash out again. But instead, Jake knelt down in front of me, his voice shaky. Madeline, I'm sorry. I was wrong. His eyes filled with tears as he glanced at my stomach. The baby, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Behind him, Caroline stood up, her face pale. Lindsay, I'm sorry. I said terrible things about you. And Madeline, I've been too hard on you. Please forgive me. Lindsay gave a small, reassuring smile. It's okay, Caroline, but you should really be apologizing to Madeline. She's been under a lot of pressure, and the baby doesn't need to hear these things either. Caroline nodded, turning to me. Madeline, I'm sorry. I've been unfair to you. I didn't know what to say. It felt surreal that both Jake and Caroline were genuinely apologizing, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I managed a small nod, but inside, I knew things would never be the same. Richard, however, wasn't satisfied. Jake, Caroline, I think it's time for both of you to leave. I don't want to see either of you right now. His voice was stern, and there was no room for argument. Jake and Caroline, looking defeated, slowly left the room. The silence they left behind was palpable. Finally, a relative spoke up, trying to ease the tension. Come on, Madeline, Lindsay, let's all sit down and eat. I smiled weakly, and for the first time that evening, I felt a sense of relief. Sitting next to Lindsay, surrounded by the rest of the family, I finally felt some peace. In the aftermath of that night, Richard's anger toward Jake didn't fade quickly. Jake was banned from the family home for the foreseeable future, and his dreams of becoming president vanished. Though he continued to work at the company, there was no longer any sign of advancement. He was stuck in his position, a far cry from the executive role he had envisioned for himself. Unable to forgive Jake for kicking me during my pregnancy, I suggested a separation. He offered a deep apology, promising never to drink alcohol again and to change his ways, but I wasn't convinced. Jake had nowhere else to go, so he ended up staying at the company, managing to get by with takeout meals and showering at a nearby gym. Over time, the stress of his new life took its toll on Jake. He lost a significant amount of weight within a month, but continued working hard and frequently checked in on me. Do you need anything? How's your health? He would ask in texts, gradually wearing down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I eventually allowed Jake to return home. When he came back, Jake apologized once more, and surprisingly, he seemed like a changed man. He no longer complained about housework, and even began taking the initiative to help around the house. You rest, Madeline, he would say, especially as my pregnancy progressed and I became less mobile. Richard, noticing Jake's changes, eventually allowed him to visit the family home again. Caroline, too, had become much quieter, no longer speaking ill of Lindsay. It seemed the events of that night had changed everyone. I want to work hard for my family now, Jake often said, his tone more genuine than I'd ever heard before. Not just for the company. Though I can never fully forgive him for what he did, I believe people can change. With Jake's newfound sense of responsibility and care, I feel confident that we can welcome our baby into a better, more peaceful home.